Forgive me, Father. Yeah, so I'd like to thank Pastor Mike for giving me this opportunity to speak to y'all today. It's not something I take lightly. It's an honor for a pastor to knowing that he could leave and knowing that the church service would still be covered for him, and it's humbling for the pastor to ask you to come and fill the pulpit, because it's an important position, and if he has that trust in you honor it. And he didn't even look at my notes, so he really has no idea what I'm speaking on today. So I figured at least check my homework before I started, but he trusted me. And also today, I'd ask that you give me some grace, because there are times when I'm speaking that my brains think of lots of things, and my mouth goes kind of fast, and I miss things, and I get things scrambled. So give me some grace. So sometimes my mouth goes faster than my brain can comprehend. So I hope today that you pick up what I'm going to lay down for you, okay? I even wrote notes here for myself. Bubba, speak slow. You've got this. All right, there's power in words, the things that we say, even to yourself. So I even wrote notes to myself. Keep it slow, okay? The average person speaks about 125 to 150 words per minute. Sometimes when I get talking, I can speed. And I've got somebody in the audience and also somebody on text that if I start speed talking, they're going to give me a warning. Hey, whoa, slow it down, man, all right? The title of the message today is Father's Blessing. And we're just going to see where this goes. If you don't know, there is a father crisis in America, worldwide. According to the Census Bureau, the 2020 census, 18.3 million children, 1 in 4, live without a biological, a step, or an adoptive father in the home. 1 in 4. Research shows that when a child is raised in a father-absent home, he or she is affected in the following ways: a 4-time greater risk of poverty, 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teen, more likely to face abuse and neglect, more likely to have behavioral problems, 2 times the greater risk of infant mortality, more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, more likely to go to prison, 2 times more likely to suffer obesity, more likely to commit crime, and 2 times more likely to drop out of high school. Those stats were based from the National Fatherhood Initiative. So we do have a crisis of fatherless homes, men's not stepping up and doing what they're supposed to do, take care of their kids, lead, love, guide. It's fine. Yeah. To lay some foundation, I wanted just to share a story that I read from Dr. Tony Evans. He was talking about adolescent male elephants, right? And in this particular region in Africa, that they have been running wild, attacking one another, other animals, and even humans. The elephant aggression at that time had become a huge problem in many parts of the world in recent decades. Scientists were trying to figure out why this was. They determined that the elephant's social structure had been destroyed, especially because of the lack of adult male bulls, who are a favorite target of poachers. When South African park rangers realized this, they flew in some surrogate, step, adoptive male elephants. Those male elephants, they flapped their ears, they raised their trunks, and bellowed for days. And it wasn't long before they restored order. Those young males got in line and stopped their destruction. The same is true for us as humans. when fathers are absent, when we fail to lead, society erodes. When men and fathers stand up, they love, they lead, society can thrive. Sorry. That bottle was full. In my current profession, I'm a law enforcement officer. And in my job, you can see the best and the worst in people. And it's hard when God has given you a heart of compassion to do some of the things that I have to do. Because you see God's heart for them and the choices that they're making. And because I'm bound by my oath to the Constitution, I have to enforce the law no matter what it is, okay? But you see those people and they're struggling, they're hurting. But you have to, and they're just in a kind of a bad place. But Jesus' love for them is the same as it is for you and me. I'd like to speak a little bit on the blessing itself. Giving your children intentional blessings can not only strengthen your relationship with them, but it also can have a rippling effect in future generations, positive or negative. We sang the song today. It's in my notes, and I didn't know what they were going to play, but just the song like the blessing. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations and your family and their children and their children and their children. I'm going to bet to assume that few of us, men, maybe even women, were verbally and or physically affirmed on a regular basis by our dads. So when we talk about blessing our children, we really don't have a good idea what that looks like, sounds like, or feels like. And so it may make us uncomfortable, we just don't do it. And maybe we're afraid to ask because it's just like asking for directions, guys. We don't do that either, right? We have GPSs now, so we don't have to do that as much, but we're self-conscious about it. We think we're not a man if we have to ask for help, you know? It's like one of those things like, so how do we do this? And, you know, and I do recognize that not all men are good at expressing feelings, or sharing their feelings, and we're not going to be able to do it all at the same extent. But if you can do it to your children, to how they can receive it, it'll reap a harvest beyond any comprehension. And I do think one of the most important things that we can do as men, as fathers, is to bless our children. I've been going into prisons and jails all over the world for the past 16 years. Before I was even in law enforcement, I had no idea this was going to happen. It's just one of those things that God presents. Did you know that today in the United States there's 2.3 million men and women that are locked up in prison? And yet only 1.5% of them are of Jewish descent. Do you guys have any idea why? You can answer if you'd like. Any idea why? Family structure? I believe it is because of bar and bat mitzvah. Okay? A rite of passage, a coming of age. Bar means boy or son. Bat means girl or daughter. When a girl turns 12 or 13, she gets her father's blessing. When a boy turns 13, he gets blessed by his father. They are blessed and welcomed into the family, accepted, acknowledged, loved on, cared for, to feel love and connected, and that someone will have their back no matter what. And I think that's why so many young men and women, when they don't get that from the father, they'll try and find it in failed relationships or getting involved in gangs and getting involved in criminal activity and things of that nature because they haven't been able to receive that and they failed to get that from their dads. During my travels, I have spoken all over the country and again all over the world, and I've been in and out of a lot of prisons. And I've asked the men that I've spoken to tell me about their fathers. Now I'm gonna summarize this because a lot of the responses were not G-rated. There's a lot of adjectives and things thrown out about how they really felt about their dad. But I can summarize it with a few statements. I hate my father. I hate my dad. I didn't have a father. Don't ask me about my dad. My mother was my father. Now I want to share that unfortunately a lot of women are put into a place of having to raise their children on their own. And for that, women, I commend you. I thank you for doing that. You are a blessing for them. But they didn't have a dad. I never knew my dad. Why is that? Is it because their fathers never blessed them? Maybe they were absent, neglectful, or abusive? Now, I'll tell you, not every man who didn't get a father's blessing ends up in prison. But almost every man in prison never got his father's blessing. So not every man that didn't get his father's blessing goes to prison. What happens to them? I grew up in Iowa, born to a upper middle class family. Had it all together. A lot of abuse, verbal, physical at home, a lot of walking on eggshells, all of it based upon my dad to me. Growing up, I didn't have the love of my dad. He didn't tell me he loved me. I was under his thumb all the time. There was always verbal abuse. He would always write these notes saying all these hurtful things. Remember, I said that words are powerful, and we have the power to speak life or curse or death over people with the things that we say, even the written word. So growing up, all these things that my dad said, wrote over me, I believed. I believed I was worthless. I believed I was no good. I believed it wasn't going to amount to anything. And that's what I thought, because that's what my dad spoke over me. Words matter. I still remember the one time he told me he was proud of me. Out of all the years, if you don't think that your positive words matter to your kids, they do. The one time he told me he was proud of me, it wasn't just because I was his, I was just a son, but I made all state, and I can see it in football, and I could see it. And then when I remember this, it's weird because I think I disassociated, because how I see it is from above, and I could see myself sitting at that kitchen table looking at that newspaper. And the view is from above, and that's how I remember it. And I'm not sure why I remember it that way, but I can see that 17-year-old boy looking at that newspaper with tears running down his face because his dad just told me he was proud of him. And that was the only time that ever happened. So when you don't have a positive male role model, you don't know how to be a man, life can be a little bit skewed. And you can do a lot of things that you're not proud of. You know, I tried to find my manhood in drinking and relationships and just investing everything I had into sports, because if my dad said he was proud of me because I played well, I'm going to put everything into that, because I want him to tell me again, Bubba, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. You strive for it. You want to hear it. Ended up meeting my wife in between my freshman and sophomore year of college. And at that point, I went to a small junior college, and I was playing football, and I was liking it. getting offers to play, but it was the one thing that my dad said he was proud of me for. And I just wanted his affirmation, but I was also angry. And it was the one thing that I had power over, my dad. So I quit playing. And I dove into this relationship with my then girlfriend, now wife, of over 24 years. 6 kids. People asked why you have 6 kids. Cause I say it because I didn't want 7. There's a joke. Kids are a blessing. But trying to figure out this relationship with this girl, not knowing how to be a man, it was rough. The first several years were very, very rough. And then I ended up meeting a man named Mark. He owned a trailer company. He himself was mentored by another man that wasn't his father. He took me in. He cared for me. He loved on me. He employed me full time so that he could have my attention all the time. And over a few years, he kept speaking life. He kept hugging on me, telling me that you can do this. He would also hold me accountable for all my whiny stuff. Because, man, I had some of that too. And he wouldn't let me wallow in that. You know, he wouldn't let me stay there. He says, I'll listen to you, but men do this. This is what a man does. This is how we change things. And eventually, after a few years of hanging out with Mark, I gave my life over to Jesus. And that's when everything changed. He stood in the gap, and he gave me a father's blessing. My dad, my biological dad, still has nothing to do with me by his choice and nothing to do with my siblings. And you know, my wife and I were talking about this the other day as we're taking Esther to her birthday dinner. She asked, do you still want that from him? Do you still want that blessing from him, or has it run its course? There used to be a time where I still was striving for it and still desired it. But I am at so much peace now with what Mark did for me and how God sees me. I would welcome it if he would. But I'm not striving for it because I believe that my dad loved me the best way he knew how. And it wasn't good, it wasn't great, but I think he did the best he could do. And I had to forgive him for that and then move on. But when Mark blessed me, that's when the healing took place. He hugged me. He looked me in the eye and said, you can do it. You're a man. I bless you as a father. You've got what it takes. In all my travels, I met a lot of people, and I've done a lot of things. One of the stories that was shared with me, I traveled with a strongman group over the world, doing feats of strength and speaking to prisons all over in Egypt and Ohio. I mean, just all over. And then I met a man named Bill Coram. And if Mark was a spiritual dad, Bill was a spiritual grandpa. And we traveled with Bill Glass's prison ministry and spoke all over the place. So he shared a story with me about a time right before his dad passed. So in 1991, it was the last summer that Bill's dad was alive. Bill's dad was 82 years old at that time, and Bill went over to mow his yard for him. It was warm. Bill shut the mower off and sat down beside his dad. Bill's mom brought out some iced tea for them both. They were just having a conversation, and Bill looked up at his dad, and Bill's dad looked across the yard, pointed over there, and said, You missed a spot right over there. Bill, apparently shaken and upset and very hurt, let me know that at that time, he'd been mowing the yard for 40 years. 40 years. And he said, I still couldn't satisfy my dad. Bill said all I ever wanted to hear him say was, son, you did a good job. But he always found something that he did wrong. Several years after Bill's dad died, Bill forgave him for not blessing him. Bill stated his dad loved him the best the way he knew how. And he just never gave me his blessing. Bill's 77 now. And he told me a story a few summers ago when he was mowing his yard. And he realized that he was going over the same spot again and again and again. Trying to chop up every little piece of leaf, every little crumb that was on there to make sure he got it perfect. He was still trying to get his dad's approval. His dad was gone. He was still in his mind trying to get his dad's approval. It sometimes feels that dads always keep that blessing just out of reach. And he never can quite meet their expectations. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever been there? There are still moments in my life that I have to fight through fear of failing, thinking that he's going to be there and tell me how worthless I am. Somewhere in the back of my brain, there's that voice that my dad spoke. I'm not good enough. You're not going to amount to anything. You're so stupid. So again, if you think that words don't matter, I'm telling you that they do. And blessings are important. I can share with you about each one of my kids at certain times in our lives. Now, it's because of Mark, it's because of Bill, and it's because of God interjecting into my life that this stuff happens. I'm not perfect. I'm just a man. I make mistakes. You can ask them after the service. I do. But I strive to be the best dad that I can be. And each one of them have a different story about that is evidence to me that it's different. That it's different. That it's not going to be the same. I'm going to share a couple. They're going to be embarrassed, but it's okay. When my oldest son was 3 or 4 years old and we were traveling, Heather was painting her fingernails. It was Luke. What was yours? I don't know. It wasn't Luke. I'm old now, and I've already messed up the story. When you got 6, you mess some things up, right? You forget their names and all type of stuff. No, Luke was the thumb. Nathan was the fingernails. I'll get to yours. It's all right. Just relax. But it was Nathan. It was painting his fingernails with his mom. It was a nice shade of blue. He wanted to be with his mom. It had some sparkles and stuff in it. Heather was telling him that people may make fun of you because your fingernails are painted, that you're different. Because how many of y'all know that people can be mean, right? They can be rude. But in all his innocence and his eyes at that time, he looked at my wife, his mama, and said, yeah, but my dad won't. He knew at that time that his dad was going to be there no matter what. It's not me. I'm telling you, it's the God through me and the effort that I have to put through that things like that happen. Luke, we were sitting downstairs watching TV, and I was watching an interview. I'm not going to go through all my kids because we'd be here for a long time. There's 6 of them, right? But we were watching an interview from one of the actors from the movie Courageous. And he was talking about how much he didn't want to have kids because he figured he would fail them. He didn't want to have kids because he would mess them up because of how his dad messed him up. Luke was laying on the couch, and at the time, sucked his thumb, and had a blankie, just like Linus from Peanuts, right? And I was just laying on the floor. We were both watching this. And he was young, 3, 4 years old. And as he's listening to this story, he sits up, he looks at me and says, "Dad, you've never failed me." Puts his thumb back in his mouth and lays down. Truth bomb. It's like, what is that? 2 hours earlier, I was swatting him on the butt for something he said to his mom. And he looks at me and says, "Dad, you've never failed me." Evidence that God is good, and he is a good daddy. And he loves you. He cares about you. He wants the best for you. I shared a story about how, as men and fathers, that we need to be able to listen to when our kids are speaking to us, even at a young age. Because if we don't, we may miss something. I shared a few weeks ago about how I was lifting at the gym with my youngest, Johanna. And at the gym, we drove there. At the gym, she wanted to walk home. And I was like, "I don't want to walk home. I just worked out, man. Like, why do you want to walk and work out more after you worked out? Right? Why would you want to do that?" But she was adamant. And if you know JoJo, she can be adamant, persistent. She says, "Daddy, I really want to walk." Okay. Reluctantly, I took her hand and we were walking. Grabbing her hand, and we're just walking. And all of a sudden I notice, and I look down and her eyes are closed. I'm like, "That's weird." It's about a mile home, and it just stormed the night before. There was, sticks in the road and leaves and water and cars whooshing by. And she's just holding on to my hand, and we're just walking, and her eyes are closed. And she goes, "Daddy," I said, "Johanna," I was like, "Why are your eyes closed?" "Daddy, I've got your hand. I know you're going to keep me safe." She was able to walk the entire way home with her eyes shut because she knew that I, as her dad, had her hand, and I was going to keep her safe. In the book of Genesis, when Esau lost the birthright and the blessing, he was most concerned about losing his blessing. The birthright was the financial part of his inheritance, but he was actually weeping over losing the blessing. His father's blessing was so important that a grown man would cry and he begged for it. When Esau found out that his brother Jacob has gotten the blessing that was supposed to go to him, 4 times in 8 verses, he begs his father, Isaac, for the blessing. Verse 34, that he burst out with a loud, bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." And verse 36, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Verse 38, "Do you have only one blessing?" This is Genesis 25, 30 through 38. Verse 38, "Bless me too, my father." And then Esau wept aloud. We are never too old to get a blessing from our fathers, or a spiritual father, or a spiritual grandfather, or to give a blessing to our children. It's not too late. And there is power in the blessing of a father. Jesus himself was empowered and released into ministry under the blessing of his heavenly Father. God himself modeled it for us in Matthew 3, 16 through 17. When he had been baptized, Jesus came up immediately from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened up to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting upon him. And suddenly a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." When Jesus came up from the water, two things happened. First, the Holy Spirit became upon him to anoint him and empower him for ministry. And second, he received a blessing of his Father in heaven. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. What a tremendous word of acceptance and approval from a father to his son. No greater example than that. So how is a blessing given? With a touch, with a hug, with a communicated word. And I changed some of this stuff up last night, and I felt that I need to put communicated word on there because words are powerful. And again, we speak life and blessing and curse with the power of our tongues. Your kids need to hear from you that you love them. Not sense it or feel it, or maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. They need to hear it from you. And unconditionally. And that blessing must be given, and it must communicate love, value, and belonging. I'm a football fan. I like the sport. Some of my favorite movies are football movies. There's a scene in Friday Night Lights. It's a movie out of 2004. And Tim McGraw played Charlie Billingsley in that movie, who was an alcoholic, abusive father to Don Billingsley, who was one of the athletes on the football team of the movie. Throughout the whole film, Charlie would berate, abuse, verbally and physically, his son Don, tell him that he can't do things, he's no good, that he had a standard that his son could never meet. And then what happened was, because his son could never meet it, the son did whatever he wanted. He tried to do the same thing and find acceptance in drinking, relationships, and pouring his life out into sports as well. There's even a scene in the movie where Charlie mocks his son with his state championship ring. And he pushes it on his head and says, "Can you touch that?" Trying to tell him that he's not going to amount to anything. He can't go up to the status of his dad, him. In the ending scene of that movie, it's powerful. If you've never watched it, I ask that you just later Google Friday Night Lights ending scene. It's powerful. They lost the game, and Don, the son, is sitting there crying in the field. You can see a shift in Charlie, his dad's face, in the stands. It just goes from like sadness, they lost the game, into a somber look, and as he's looking upon his son. Now I'm telling you, this is movie land, okay? I'm painting a picture of this movie the way I saw it when I watched the movie, okay? It may not be the actual story, but it's a powerful moment, okay? And as the team is weeping and crying that they've lost this game, Charlie, the dad, comes out of the stands and walks up to his son, who is visibly shaken that they lost the game, and he is crying. He grabs his son's shoulder, wraps his arm around him, and gives him a big embrace. He ends up grabbing his son's helmet and looking him straight in the eye. Now, the words that he says, we don't know. There's no actual dialogue, but you can see his mouth moving. So I assume he's telling him that he was proud of him, that he loved him. And he's looking at his eyes. And he's communicating that love from a father to a son. He then grabs his son's hand and takes that state championship ring that he was mocking him with earlier and puts it on his finger. Almost like, well done. And then the dad grabs him, reaches him up into an embrace. The son's face, you can see it come over the top of the father's shoulder. And then you can see a point where he breaks and almost melts. Like, finally, after all my striving, after all the things that I've gone through, I finally have the blessing of my dad. And then he takes his arm, and you can see it wrap up with that ring on his finger and embrace his dad. To me, that scene in itself is powerful. Again, I don't know all the detail. I'm just talking about the movie itself. It's powerful. Fathers, mothers, if you have not given a blessing to your children, I challenge you today that do not let the sun go down until you tell them that you love them, you care for them, and what they mean to you. Give them that blessing that they need. Because until it's received, we don't know what's going to happen. Until I received that from Mark, we had no idea what would have happened. But I'm telling you now, the fruit of that blessing from Mark to me is seen through my kids, to my wife, and the opportunities that they have that I didn't are immense. Give them your blessing. So it was short, medium. For those of you watching, I appreciate you joining us today. We appreciate your support. Thank you for supporting the ministry of the church. Thank you for your giving and your love. You all have a great week.